Welcome to Scrolling to Death. I'm Nikki, and today I'm joined by Dr. Mark Woodall. Dr. Woodall is a naturopathic doctor with a passion for helping patients struggling with chronic pain and disease by making informed lifestyle modifications that put your health into balance. So, Dr. Woodall, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So if you had to narrow it down, what are a couple of the big trends you're noticing in the health of teens that you're seeing?
So I think that the biggest thing is just how technology is impacting people's mental health. If you look at the statistics on ADHD, the statistics on anxiety and depression, we don't see flattenings. We don't see decreases. We see increases. Basically, if you were born after the year of 1996, that's kind of like the year when, if you were born then, by the time you're 14, Instagram, kind of YouTube, like these things have already been up and running. The ubiquity of iPhones has just very high use in the populations. And these kids are growing up with this. And so they don't have that opportunity to have more developmental years to develop their brain and use other parts of, engage with other parts and other things in their environment to support their mental health. And so today, just this morning, I had a parent come to see me. The father, his daughter was going to be taken to school later. And she's glued to her iPad, just playing a game. And one of the things I really like to do when I'm thinking about just the prevalence of anxiety, ADHD, and if there's a connection here with the use of technology, social media apps, is to have people pull out their phones and show me their screen time. And I'll ask my patients, like, how much are you on your phone? And then I'll just double check them and say, hey, can I see your phone for a second? And I'll go into the settings, look at screen time. And I did this just last week with a young girl, and I would think it was around 10 to 12 hours she was averaging on her phone.
Wow.
And so that is a lot of time on a device, and it has severe implications for a lot of different things.
Yeah, and there is research now that excessive screen time at those levels is having a hand in ADHD-like symptoms, anxiety, depression, and even suicidal ideation. And so you are seeing that in your practice through the teens. What would you tell a parent that comes in and is like, my child is acting depressed and anxious, and obviously there's a link to technology? Do you have some like basic tips that you try to have them implement?
Yeah. Having those conversations at that age, while never too late, I think the more we can start with early, awareness around this before we're putting iPads and iPhones in front of people and having safer uses of these technologies, I think is where the biggest bulk of benefit can happen. But I would say that my goals for my patients are to try to have screen time under 3 hours a day, and to have somewhere around, because I also look at pickups. How often are you just picking up your phone or your device? It tracks that too. And to try to keep that somewhere under 70. Again, if you think about that, that's almost 3 times an hour that you might be picking up your device. And again, you're sleeping at least 7 of those hours. So you may, in fact, be picking your device up 6, 7, 10 times during waking hours to get to numbers. This patient that I was recently thinking about, who was, some days 12, 13, 14 hours, 10 hours other days, she was, I want to say, picking up her device about 180 times a day.
Wow.
Which is just a very frequent thing that I think has a lot of problems in terms of how your brain organizes, creates safety, things like that.
Yeah. Is that under settings too for pickups? I haven't heard of that setting.
Yep. So I don't know about Android phones, but if you have an Apple iPhone, you just go to screen time in your settings, and it'll show you your total time, what apps you're using that in, and then if you just scroll further down on the window, it will tell you your pickups.
Okay. Awesome. So you are promoting limiting screen time. I appreciate the number, under 3 hours. It's always good to give parents just like a guideline. I know every family is different and uses technology in different ways. We also, as the kids get older, need to start factoring in their screen time at school.
Totally.
I know that my kids, for example, starting in kindergarten, have iPads in their class. So I had to have those discussions with the teachers around how much time are they really spending and kind of try to factor that in. So just something for parents to think about, make sure to factor in that school time, screen time, school time, screen time, because it all adds up, right?
And the other thing I was just say is there's a lot of nuance around that, right? So like if you're using navigation apps for driving from someplace, that counts as screen time for screen time itself. And so like obviously there are some times when that number might look exorbitant, or if it's mostly music, because it'll break down the apps that people are using. And if they're listening to music and it's counting that as screen time, again, there's more leeway and nuance to that. But if someone's, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook for, excessive amounts of the time, that's where we're really getting concerned.
Yeah. So when it comes to kids having phones, I wonder if you have a guideline you offer parents around like, when should my kid get a phone? And I know every family's different, has different needs.
So my general feeling, if I could like enact a law for, the country or whatever, the thing that I think would have a major difference would be I would just ban smartphones. And so that you could have a phone and that phone could text and that phone could have a calendar, a calculator, it could have a map function, and it could have some music. And that would kind of be the bare bones that I would say is like a dumb phone or a more simplistic phone.
Yeah.
And I don't think I have, at least where I'm at, I think that's the bigger battle to that I'm concerned about. And so I wouldn't let someone under the age of 18 be engaged with lots of smartphones.
So what is it about that smartphone that you feel is not beneficial to even the teens?
When you look at the totality of evidence, this is causing problems. I think that the more we can delay usage of apps and put healthy limits on certain apps that are literally designed to keep you engaged with them, that is a healthful thing for the development of a healthy brain. We put lots of guardrails on a variety of different substances for youth that you can't use when you're, 15, you can't use until you're 21, things like that, from alcohol to cannabis to a variety of things. We want people making good decisions, and if they don't fully understand how those decisions they're making are implicating their health and happiness in the future, when certain parts of their brain to think about the future are not fully developed, and the consequences of those actions, we're setting up people to fail.
Yeah. And I think there is more and more research now, and I think we're getting closer and closer to having some regulation when it comes to some of those apps. And I think we're referencing social media mostly here. And I wonder if you see a link in your patients between social media use and anxiety, depression, things like that.
Absolutely. I think the data is stronger in young teenage girls than it is for men, for younger boys, younger males, but it's still there for both genders. I treat patients with anxiety relatively commonly. And so it's a common thing that comes up, and it's one of the first things, like if you're not sleeping, then your mental health is not going to be at a good space. And then you might say like, oh, I struggle with sleep. And so we say, hey, what time are you going to bed? And some people are saying 2 to 4 a.m. in the morning. And it's really hard for your brain to work well if you're constantly staying up at 2 to 4 a.m. That's not to say that never can happen in survival situations. That doesn't exist. But if we're trying to build healthy, happy, actualized humans, then there are certain fundamental things about circadian rhythms that matter. If the social media or the phone or the game on the phone or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be social media. It could be that I'm playing some kind of game on your phone, and that's continuing to keep you up and keep you aroused and engaged, as well as just the light on the phone itself. And so all of that impacts your arousal and your melatonin secretions. So one of the things that happens is there's a natural circadian rhythm to our stress hormones of cortisol and melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that comes on with darkness. And so as the sun is setting and the night is getting darker, that lack of light that is hitting our eyes is being picked up by our brain, and we're starting to secrete melatonin. And if you are engaging in bright screens, whether it's on your computer, whether it's on a phone, whether it's the TV, all of that can have implications for your melatonin secretion. Now, it's kind of a twofold thing where it's partly the light, but it's also just the arousal of whatever you're doing and engaging. It might be a super engaging Netflix series or some show or something that is really activating your brain and keeping you awake and keeping you engaged. Mm-hmm. And the longer you push into the night and not go to sleep, you're literally secreting cortisol to keep you going because your body's saying, hey, I should be asleep, but I'm actually going to push through this. And to push through that, you need the energy to do that. And cortisol, that stress hormone, what it's doing is mobilizing you to have the energy to do that. And if you spend some of that energy at that nighttime doing that, what you'll find is on the next day, you don't have the same reserve of energy to do that from a cortisol perspective. That doesn't always happen day to day, but over a long enough timeline, that is impacting people's health and their rhythms. Anything after 11 at night would be a very hard, like, this is definitely impacting you. And then there's certain age dependency from there. So if you're talking younger and younger and younger, the time's getting earlier and earlier and earlier. But for anyone, if it's over 11 o'clock at night and you're exposing yourself to bright lights, that is impacting tomorrow's performance, tomorrow's energy, tomorrow's mental, emotional state.
Okay. I've been told that over time, getting a lack of sleep in those younger ages when your body's developing and your brain is developing, it can really hinder their development. So how does that look? If your kid is up till 2 a.m. getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night through their teen years, what results could you see from that? Negative results can you see from that as they get older?
One of the things that has really changed, I'm going to switch this to a performance discussion for a second, which is in high performance now, people track their heart rate variability and they track a lot of different metrics to understand how rested they are so that they can know when to push their bodies to understand that they can receive the adaptations. Because if you're doing an exercise and you're not fully recovered and you're not giving the full effort to push your body to get stronger, faster, fitter, then you're not able to achieve the goal in high performance athletics. Mm-hmm. And so you can take that and think about it in when you're speaking about learning is you need to be in a state of your mind to be able to learn and receive information. And if you are always in a depleted state where you are sleep deprived, your ability to learn is dramatically impacted. On average, I think it's about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes, 30 minutes. People are sleeping less now per night than 100 years ago. We're sleeping dramatically less as a society, and that has implications for young people in terms of their learning ability. And if your learning ability is compromised, then you don't like going to school because it's kind of really hard and you're not being rewarded because everything is too difficult. And then that's going to make you engage in wanting to do other things that might be easier or might be not as beneficial for maybe from your own personal health and engaging in more difficult or risky behaviors. Be a slippery slope that all kind of starts with we weren't rested and we weren't ready to receive that information, and then that kind of compounds.
So this is helpful for parents to understand why all the experts say don't let them have their phones in their bedroom after whatever bedtime you set, right?
100%. I have two boys. I have a 6-year-old and he turns 6 very soon. and I have another boy who is 2.5. And we have very like clear guidelines on how much time we let them watch TV and how much time they engage with an iPad. My oldest son in kindergarten currently does like a 50-50 public school homeschool. So he's actually in public school half the time and he's in homeschool the other half of the time, which is a really unique opportunity that we have.
Yeah.
And he has an iPad, a very old iPad that we engage. We have some things on it, but we don't let him use that for more than 30 minutes, probably 3 times a week. There are times when his younger brother is looking at that with him too. And if I'm around, we're trying to divert and delay engagement with that. Now, from a show watching perspective, we found that even 30 minutes of television, depending on when our son watched that, was sometimes creating emotional dysregulation. He was just more irritable.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also try to engage in family like watching. So it's like a movie that has a specific theme that we're trying to encourage, whether that be like teamwork or grit and different things like that. And having that being a setting, not where it's just like he's in a room by himself, isolated from his family, and mom and dad are just doing something totally different. We try to have a family movie night once a week.
I love that and I connect to it. Obviously, not all tech is bad and it can bring people together. I have a lot of families that like to play video games as a family, or we do a lot of family movie nights. That's how we don't have iPads in the home. So our screen time is in front of the television all together watching a movie. But I did notice with my son, who's now 6, a lot of emotional dysregulation around when we did use an iPad. And we would limit it to 30 minutes. He was just getting so obsessed with it. It's all he wanted to talk about. It's all he wanted to do. So we cut it down to 10 minutes a day. And then it still became such an obsession for him that I thought, this isn't worth it. And once we pulled it, he brought it up like 1 or 2 more times. And it's been almost a year, maybe 9 months, and he hasn't brought it up again. And I'm like, okay, that wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. And now when he gets home from school and finishes his homework, he runs outside and is playing outside rather than asking for the iPad or staring at a screen. And like I said, they do get that time in school too. So thank you for sharing that personal experience. I think that that's really helpful. I wanted to touch on, you were talking about phones and trying to delay giving smartphones, and I agree. And luckily for us, with our kids being a bit younger, there are companies that are developing and selling phones that are kid-friendly or kid-smart, teen-smart phones. So I've reviewed a few of those on my YouTube channel and have some clips on Instagram. There's the Bark phone, the Pinwheel phone, TrueMe. There's a few other brands. And there's also the Light phone, which is for adults too, or Flip phone. I think some brands are selling flip phones these days.
Well, the thing that I wanted to bring it back to here is also a great question to have a parent reflect on is if you had to go to a medical appointment, like you as the parent, can your child like create some imaginative story or read a book or play with some toys and be engaged in their own world for the 30 minutes that you're with them? Or are they like constantly nagging and creating this, I want the iPad, I want the iPad, I want the iPhone, I want the iPhone? I have been to multiple appointments with my oldest son. I cannot tell you the number of other clinicians who just say like, and again, like there's nothing I would say like overly inherently special about my son other than how he was kind of developed and raised and things. And what I mean by that is, what do your kids see you doing? And so if your kids are constantly seeing mom and dad on the phone, then they're gonna mirror that. One of the things I'm most proud of about raising my son is I'm just a person who, when I sit down to lunch and sometimes breakfast, I'm just looking and reading at a book. And it's like a paperback book, a hardcover book, something. And I'm just reading something. And my oldest son, when he was young, he looked at that, saw his dad reading at the breakfast table, reading at the lunch table, and he was like, I want to be like my dad. And he just started picking up books. And I mean, he can't fully read yet at, almost 6, but he's learning to read. But He's looking at books. He's looking at the pictures. He's thinking about memorizing what the lines are on the page. And that's creating a lot of skills. And then he does that when he's in the car, or he does that when he's in the doctor's office. He can transition that skill and learn to sit still and not have to have something constantly engaging with him, and just engaging at a standard rate for him.
And the default does not have to be to hand your kids an iPad or a phone. And I don't want to judge anyone that does this, but we've all been at restaurants
Absolutely.
where you look around and all the kids are on iPads. And there's so many harms in doing that. You're not communicating with your child. Their creativity levels can decline. So just encouraging parents, from everyone I've spoken with, including you now, don't always default to the phone. Let your kids be creative. Let your kids be bored. That's where creativity can develop. And so I love those like little reminders. Sometimes it might not be that big blow up or that big behavioral issue that you think it's going to be if you just don't have that be an option.
Another thing that I would bring up as ideas and strategies are, what did you do as a child? And try to think back to that. So my son and I, we will play rock, paper, scissors. And then he'll create this own, like, he'll create fire instead of rock, paper, scissors. He's like, I don't want to do rock, paper, scissors. We're going to add fire to rock, paper, scissors. Or he wants to play tic-tac-toe with me. Or I just recently taught him how to play hangman on a menu if there are crayons with the kids' menus. And so thinking about those games that your parents maybe played with you as a child, and if they didn't, creating resources for people so that some of these things can be, what are alternatives? So it's not just like, hey, we're not going to look at a phone, but, just sit here quietly kind of thing. These are opportunities to engage with your kid and to engage in a fun, kind of like non-parental way, and just to create play and enjoyment.
Yeah, and we always play I Spy. My older kids are old enough now to do 20 questions, so we started implementing that. But I remember my dad used to take like the sugar packets and sort of lean them against each other and build little houses. There's lots of creative things, even if you have to buy little conversation starter cards that are aimed towards kids or families. If you need some more prompting, there are so many options that encourage conversation and connection and build those memories and mirror that behavior so that they will then take that into their family. Like, let's just get ourselves on a little bit of a better track when it comes to connecting, especially around meals and family activities.
One of the things that I'll just echo on to that is a quote that I heard. It was actually from my sister. She just flew in yesterday, and my brother-in-law, her husband, said, the only person who is going to remember if you overworked are your kids. Your boss isn't going to remember this. Some coworker's not going to remember this. The only people who remember if mom and dad are overworking themselves are the kids. And so just thinking about that as a perspective and having these reminders, because these are things that need to constantly be reminded. These are perishable resources, I guess is the way that I think about them, and they need to be renewed constantly.
Agree. Okay, so I asked on Instagram for questions. If anyone had questions for a naturopathic doctor, I got a couple of responses. So we talked about the blue light. And so one mom asked, is there a link between blue light and early puberty?
I am not aware of any research that discusses early puberty specifically related to blue light. It's more related to sleep, circadian dysfunction, and then associated mental health.
Am I right that there is a trend that puberty is happening earlier and earlier, especially for girls?
Yeah. And that would be, again, definitely a different topic, although something that I am passionate about as well, which is environmental medicine and environmental exposure. At high enough concentrations, a variety of these different plastics, parabens, a variety of these different chemicals are absorbed, are internally taken in, different pesticides, and they have significant implications for our brain and our endocrine system. So the two main systems in your body that are impacted the most from environmental medicine are going to be the brain and the endocrine system, which would be your hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. It's definitely dose response. So the more and more and more you're exposed to these things. The problem is that this is ubiquitous. I think they recently sampled breast milk, and again, like I'm a huge believer in breastfeeding. My wife is like very much into the whole breastfeeding and optimizing nutrition. She's a fertility nutritionist. Even breast milk, like there's like 2% of women who don't have some kind of exposure when we look at a test. And again, that's everybody. That's even me, who is taking a huge look at this and doing sauna and doing all these other avoidance type strategies. And so I don't want to create a society of fear. And the more we can enact positive change, I definitely support that. But I think that in terms of early puberty, yes, puberty is definitely happening earlier. That's more environmentally driven than light exposure, device exposure.
Is there a specific like website or book that people can access to learn more about those environmental factors?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's called the EWG.org, so Environmental Working Group. One of the best places, and they have, I believe it's called Skin Deep, is a tab in the EWG, the Environmental Working Group. They're the people who create the Dirty Dozen list and the Clean 15 list for what fruits and vegetables and foods have more pesticides or less pesticides that they measure every year. They put that list out, and then they have a whole list of cosmetics and different things that will give you like, these ingredients are slightly concerning or they're safe and things like that.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. So another mom mentioned that her son has some anxiety and he deals with that through keeping his headphones in all the time. And so he uses that as sort of a coping mechanism. And she's just wondering your thoughts on using headphones as a coping tool.
Yeah. And so one of the first things that I would consider engaging with is, how do we create peace and safety from a foundational neurological level? And so if we're using headphones, are they just noise cancellation headphones? I don't know if they can engage with us, or are they listening to music? One of the things that I email almost every patient, like they have access to, is a breath pacer that I will give people. And people can YouTube breath pacers. They can download breath pacers from different places. Most people are breathing at around 12 to 14 breaths per minute. And if we were to slow people's breathing down at 5 to 7 breaths per minute, that can help improve our emotional regulation. For this mom, if this child has headphones in, I would start by trying to add an additional skill of learning how to regulate their nervous system through slow-paced breathing and having that be played through the headphones. And then as they transition, you might be able to go to cordless headphones and have one headphone out and the other headphone in while they're practicing that. And then eventually they start listening to that same track that's developing this state of peace with the noise being audio speaker rather than in the headphone. And that's basically trying to decouple safety and headphones and learn to create that safety elsewhere. And so I wouldn't take the headphones away. I would use it as a tool and medium to try to engage with other practices and then slowly peel that back.
Okay. Amazing. That's great advice. And then a question from me, just because I'm interested in this. So you mentioned melatonin, and your body produces it when, the sun goes down. And I noticed a lot of parents are supplementing their kids' melatonin and giving them, melatonin gummies every night. And this just didn't feel right to me. I did a little bit of research, but I'm not super into taking medication, and it just didn't feel right to me to be dosing my kids up to get them to go to sleep. They should be able to go to sleep on their own. So, what do you feel about the trend of giving kids melatonin in the evenings to help them go to sleep?
I definitely want to delineate like ages here. And so like, I think that I might make a delineation of, this is very arbitrary in my mind, but I would say probably 10 and 12 and under, and like kind of 13 plus. And I would say across the board, the overarching principle should be people don't need melatonin, right? Our melatonin is secreted through darkness. And if people are having a hard time with going to sleep, There are a variety of things such as, did you create enough fatigue during the day? So have you moved enough? Is the temperature regulation off? Again, you need to drop your core body temperature to go to sleep. And so I would be looking at if people have the resources and money, like cooling devices, if they need to. Mm-hmm. And then the light exposure. And that starts with adjusting the lighting. If you were to come over to my house in the evening, it looks orange. Like it's like the orange of this like background here. It doesn't have this bright blue light. We have special lights that people can buy that are not like crazy expensive, that are super bright when you want the light to be bright, and you can adjust them to be orange reddish in the evening to create that environment. And so I would say, how can we mimic nature to support what nature would naturally do? When you're in your home and you're not outside and you have electricity and other things in 2023, trying to create changes in your lighting. So my son's, their room is orange in the evening, and then actually we turn it red as they're going to sleep. And so I would say across the board, I would recommend against melatonin. That's not a hard recommendation. If there are significant true sleep problems, and depending on what's going on, that would be case by case. But I would say the overarching principle should be your kids should not need melatonin at any stage. And that includes teenagers, right? And so the teenagers too, again, the first thing we want to work on is not letting your kids sleep in, okay? Because if they're staying up late, they're going to want to sleep in. And we need to get them up at a more reasonable time. And that could be by first turning their lights on and not even saying anything to them. You don't have to be like, hey, get up, get up. It can just turn the lights on. And if that helps wake them up 20 minutes earlier or 10 minutes earlier, you can build on that throughout the week and the time period. And so working on that sleep hygiene is more important. And then from making sure you have flux on your computer, night shift modes for phones, hopefully if you are using those, or blue blockers if people are really struggling. All of my patients that are really struggling with sleep and circadian rhythm issues, I do recommend blue blockers. And these are sunglasses that are orange tinted that really help shift the lighting and the arousal from lighting for people. And the research shows that they work.
And then the lights that you install in the house to turn kind of orange at night, do those have a certain name, or should we just look up evening orange light on Amazon?
So unfortunately, the company that I used went out of business during COVID. They were called Healthy Lighting, with health with an E. I use just standard red lights that people use for other health purposes. So people who are aware of this thing called red light therapy or photobiomodulation, they will have red lights at the 660 nanometer wavelengths and near infrared lights. And so I literally just double the device when I'm using red lights for my kids is the same light that I use for joint health or skin health or something like that, is actually doubling as like the nighttime light. But then in terms of the actual house lighting, I would have to, again, Home Depot, like you'll find lights that do this at Home Depot. Any store is going to have them. And you're just looking for a light that can fluctuate between kind of standard blue white light and your reddish orange.
Okay, amazing. Listeners here are parents, and we're struggling with raising our kids with all the technology that's available. And obviously, like we said, not all tech is bad, so we have to set limits and educate them appropriately. Do you have any other tips that you like to share that we didn't cover already to help parents through this time?
I think the big things for me are trying to understand screen time, trying to understand pickups, creating alternatives, wearing a watch instead of picking up your phone to look at your phone to check the time. I definitely think that there is twofold of personal responsibility, but also actual true societal change that needs to happen. And I would encourage parents to try to talk to their teacher, their kids' teachers at the parent-teacher meetings. So again, I don't just work with with kids and teenagers, I work more with the parents, and some of those parents are actually teachers, and these teachers are depressed because they don't have the power and the authority to regulate cell phone use in their class, and then these kids aren't learning. And then they are being graded on how well they're doing teaching their class. And if their kids can't learn because they can't help regulate cell phone use, it's a really vicious cycle. And then when the teachers try to band together and go to a board meeting, the board won't back them because they're afraid of the parents. Okay. And so that is just heart crushing to me. I have a patient of mine. He teaches, high school physics. And he's just super down about the state of his classroom. And he's been a teacher for 10, 15 years. And the board just didn't back them. France has done this. France is getting cell phones out of the area. And New Zealand, my sister lives in New Zealand. She just told me that the laws should be changing for school usage of these things. And so,
yeah, in the UK too.
This is changing. And I think that there are individual things, and then there are things that I would encourage the parents to try to engage with the teachers to try to get on the page, because the board is just afraid of the parents. And if the parents are in agreement with the teachers, then you can truly push a change in society.
Yeah, and the phone bans in schools, it comes up on every interview. There's been so much news around this. I did a couple posts on Instagram. There's strong opinions across the board on phone bans in schools, and parents' number one concern is safety related. If there's a school shooting, how will I know if my kid's okay? And that's totally something that I would want to do as well. And I have interviewed teachers who say it's actually not best if all the kids are on their phones during an emergency. It's actually very distracting and unsafe.
Yeah, and I think that this problem also just gets solved easier if you just, at a national level, ban smartphones to a certain age. And that way they can still call out in national emergencies. They can still text out in national emergencies, but it's going to, I think, significantly change. And so you still have communication, but you don't have all of the other things that are going on. And so, yeah, I think I can understand that perspective.
Banning smartphones through to a certain age.
Exactly.
Is I think makes sense. For me personally, I don't want my kids having smartphones before they're maybe 16, 17. We'll see what things look like then. But there's certain bills that are trying to be pushed through right now to regulate big tech on its own and kind of put some liability back on them when it comes to the addictive features and all that kind of thing. And there's a lot of pushback on that too around free speech. So it's actually really interesting to have kept up with what's going on. 42 US states are currently suing Meta for creating a product that harms children. It seems obvious that kids should not have smartphones. It's bad for them and their health outcomes, as you shared. But sometimes it's not as easy as that when it comes to implementing it, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, sometimes you don't know until the data's in. And I would say the data is in. We don't there is so much data that supports this that I would think that we have enough to move on. And maybe that wasn't true. Again, these companies didn't exist 20 years ago. And so it's just a different time, and you can only make the best decisions with the best data that you have.
Can you share about your practice and where people can find you in Washington?
Yeah, so I practice in Issaquah, Washington. I practice at Cascade Integrative Medicine. People can, if you live in the state of Washington, I can see you, I can work with you, things like that. Through telemed, you generally need to come in for the first visit in person, and then we can do telemed visits in the state of Washington from there. I'm a little bit active on Twitter, mostly reposting research of things that I am interested in. Dr. Woodall, ND is my handle on Twitter. Those are the two areas.
Okay, amazing. Dr. Woodall, thank you again for spending this time with me today. As always, for the listeners, I will continue to bring you guys information and experts in the space to help guide us through our parenting journeys. Thanks again, Dr. Woodall, for being here with me today.
Thank you.